the secret factory exodus that is about to kill Germany. The notice went up at midnight, production suspended, temporary adjustment. By sunrise, security was escorting night shift machinists off the floor, forklifts idled. The furnace went cold. A manager read from a sheet, optimization, while workers filmed on their phones, whispering, "Is this it?" The union rep stared at the locked door and said nothing. This wasn't a rumor. It was a switch flipped. Energy bills had doubled, export orders vanished, and the company's press release called it portfolio realignment. Meanwhile, officials promised resilience as if the empty parking lot were a spreadsheet mistake. Factories are leaving, the miracle is ending, and you're not supposed to see the pattern. Keep watching. Once you see the pattern, you won't unsee it. Here's what you're going to get. No euphemisms, no upbeat forecasts pasted over a recession chart. We're going to show you the bargain that built post-war German industry, the lever it pulled in the dark, and the moment that lever snapped. You'll see the data trail, indices sinking to levels that are a dip, they're a direction. Purchase managers reporting contraction as a condition, not a phase. Insolvency filings that don't make the evening news but empty out entire towns. We'll translate the sanitized language, maintenance, mothballing, temporary, into what it actually means. Trained teams disbanded, tool rooms auctioned, dies crated and shipped. We'll map where the capacity is going, to the United States for cheap energy and subsidies, to Central and Eastern Europe for labor cost and proximity, to Asia for scale and speed. Once a mold moves, it doesn't commute back for nostalgia. We'll build the story on 3 reveals. First, the foundation of the illusion, how an obsession with precision and exports rested on a single point of failure, abundant, predictable, cheap energy, and a currency structure that kept the engine humming. Second, the data unveiling, the chorus of numbers that say out loud what officials woe. Third, the point of no return, the quiet choices that lock the exit. The miracle looked invincible because it was engineered to be, but it relied on one lever. Pull it, cut the gas, raise the power price, slow the permits, and the room tilts. To understand why the floor just slid under people's feet, we have to go back. The foundation of the illusion. Start in the rubble. After 1945, German industry rebuilt with a particular temperament, middle-stand discipline, apprenticeship pipelines, and a kind of pride that measured itself in microns. The formula was simple to say and brutal to execute. Make the best parts in the world, make them reliably, and ship them everywhere. Small and mid-sized firms became quiet champions, exporting gearboxes, sensors, machine tools, and components no consumer ever sees but every factory depends on. For decades, the 1950s boomed through the 2000s. The model scaled because costs were predictable and energy was cheap. The miracle wasn't magic, it was design. And embedded in that design was a trade, offload volatility, keep precision at home. Energy became the invisible partner in every invoice. Natural gas pipelines were the arteries. Contracts priced on the assumption that baseload would be there, pressure stable, molecules cheap. You could run ammonia, plastics, glass, cement, and heat treatment without flinching at the power bill. That mattered because the regulatory maze, stringent standards, environmental compliance, social protections, only worked if the energy arbitrage made the math pencil out. Meanwhile, the euro structure helped exporters. A currency that smoothed volatility inside the bloc made order books more predictable. Margins lived in the spread between input costs and world prices. If you're balancing precision labor, high compliance, and slow permitting, you need something to offset it. Energy did that. The euro helped too. Here's the lock-in. Culturally, the system selected for incremental optimization over reinvention. Engineers shaved seconds off cycle times, extended tool life, perfected tolerances. It wasn't a valley of flashy pivots. It was a plateau of quiet improvements. That culture works until the baseline shifts. Then iteration becomes a trap because you're optimizing for a world that no longer exists. To understand how tight the energy tether was, look at the chemical sector. Feedstock gas isn't just heat, it's the molecule you transform. Ammonia is fertilizer, but it's also the upstream for coatings and materials. Plastics feed autos. Chloralkali feeds everything from PVC to solvents. If gas is cheap and predictable, the downstream thrives. If it spikes, as it did when pipeline gas collapsed into LNG premiums, margins collapse, and the shock ripples through autos, machinery, construction materials. The famous German car is a rolling bill of materials from chemistry, glass, and metals. Cut the artery, the limbs go numb. And hedging, it buys time, not immunity. Long-term contracts smooth the early waves. But hedges expire, roll over, and suddenly last year's power price becomes a nightmare line item. Managers who promised temporary turbulence faced renewal quotes that wiped out profits. Some called it a bridge. Plant controllers looked at the spreadsheets and started drawing exit plans. Quietly, because you don't announce a multi-year relocation before the last order ships. Inside boardrooms, the bargain got rerun. If Europe's regulatory load is fixed and energy is now a premium, the equation flips. Production that survived because of cheap gas now gets priced against the United States with shale power, against Poland and Hungary with lower labor and faster permits, against Asia with integrated supply chains and speed. There's pride, there's heritage, and there's the quarterly cash burn. Boards pick survival. Euro stability turned on them too, indirectly. When input costs shock and the currency can't adjust for just one country, the pain concentrates in margins. You don't devalue to regain competitiveness. You cut, consolidate, relocate. The miracle's currency friend becomes a constraint. Then there's permitting. Slow approvals were tolerable when you weren't trying to reinvent plants under a clock. Once energy shocks, the penalty for delay isn't frustration, it's exit. Litigation risk and multi-year environmental reviews meet CFOs who can buy a site permit in months elsewhere. The German advantage had always been certainty. Certainty flipped sides, certainty of cost pain here, certainty of permitting speed there. What nobody wanted to say out loud. The system's strength, world-class compliance, labor protections, meticulous process, was financed by the energy lever. Pull the lever and you don't just raise bills, you unmask how tight the margins really were. The middle stand's excellence doesn't vanish, but the ecosystem that made it profitable starts to thin. Tool makers who relied on local orders watch domestic customers cancel. Engineers follow projects, not flags. Apprenticeships stall when firms freeze hiring. Regional wage webs fray. Meanwhile, a separate but linked factor, export dependence. When global demand softens, you can ride it out if your cost base is forgiving. If your cost base spikes, every down cycle feels like an indictment. A portfolio that was resilient under cheap gas becomes fragile. Leaders keep the language calm, optimization. Right sizing, temporary, because panic creates self-fulfilling spirals. But decisions are already in motion, packed inside shipping crates labeled with serial numbers and forwarding addresses. This was the moment the room tilted. The miracle relied on abundant, predictable, cheap energy and a currency framework that favored exporters. It prized incremental genius over radical shifts. It tolerated a regulatory overhead because energy made it viable. Remove the lever and all the careful balance points slide. If that's true, the numbers should scream. Let's pull the files. The hidden lever, energy as destiny. To see how the lever worked, trace the pipelines. Nord Stream wasn't a headline, it was an industrial artery. Molecules left Siberia and arrived under the Baltic with a reliability engineers baked into cost models. Baseload power wasn't a luxury, it was the floor under every price, every shift schedule, every contract. When planners forecast margins, gas at X wasn't a guess, it was the hinge the whole door swung on. When that artery was severed in 2022, LNG premiums replaced pipeline certainty. Chemistry made the dependence visible. Ammonia isn't just fertilizer, it's the ancestor of coatings, resins, and laminates that end up on dashboards and gear housings. Crack the molecule cheaply and the downstream sings, polyurethanes for seats, ABS for trims, adhesives that cure on time. Chloralkali powers PVC and solvents, steam crackers feed plastics, acetyls thread into paints. When gas spiked, the first domino wasn't a car plant, it was a reactor vessel. A paused column in Ludwigshafen echoed, as delayed bumper skins in Wolfsburg months later. Now line that up with electricity prices. In the United States, shale turned kilowatt-hours into a comparative advantage, with industrial power and gas costs materially below Europe's. In parts of Asia, coal and integrated coastal clusters kept industrial tariffs low. Germany's spread wasn't a rounding error, it was the difference between running a furnace and shutting it. Energy-intensive steps, melting glass, annealing steel, curing composites, don't negotiate with high tariffs. Margins couldn't absorb it. There's only so much you can squeeze from cycle times before physics answers back. Hedging masked the first shock. Purchasing desks had locked in multi-quarter gas and power at pre-crisis levels. Managers told town halls, "We've got coverage." But hedges roll. When the renewal quotes landed, the spreadsheet stopped being an abstraction. A coding line that lived on a 2% margin suddenly faced a double-digit energy surcharge. Controllers started circling red cells. Plants pushed maintenance into temporary mothballing to buy calendar time. The word bridge got heavy use while teams quietly called brokers about moving equipment. Meanwhile, official statements promised turbulence would pass. The physics didn't care. Once pipelines turned into LNG cargoes, Europe paid a premium. Buyers bid on molecules that had to be liquefied, shipped, regasified, every step an added cost and a choke point. Baseload trust the idea that electrons and heat would be there at a known price, stopped anchoring models. You can run a pilot on volatile power. You can't base an entire cluster's cost structure on it. Inside factories, the energy lever showed up as choices. Do you keep the chloralkali cell running and shut a downstream line, or reverse it? Do you idle a glass furnace, risking thermal damage, or keep it hot and bleed cash? Plant managers walked catwalks doing mental math with each valve and pump. They weren't deciding ideology. They were deciding whether a seal replacement would still pay off if the site moved in 18 months. Cross-board tables, the map shifted. U.S. Gulf Coast pitches arrived with gas at half the European price and permits in months. Central and Eastern Europe offered proximity to German engineers, lower wages, and municipal leaders who answered the phone. In Asia, chemical parks said, "Bring the unit, we've got crackers, rail, and customers at the fence." Executives didn't need slogans, they needed baseload. Projects followed electrons. What nobody saw on press releases, multi-year exit plans baked into temporary language. Logistics teams booked heavy lift slots. Tool rooms inventoried dies for crating. HR drew retention bonuses to keep critical operators until the last batch. Maintenance deferred replacements that wouldn't amortize before the move. R&D globalized, which meant pilot lines relocated to where power was cheap and uninterrupted. This was the lever snapping. Cheap, predictable energy had disguised structural weight, regulatory drag, labor rigidity, slow permits. Without that subsidy, the costs weren't theoretical. They were the number at the bottom of the weekly production meeting. Leaders said resilience while plant dashboards flashed underutilized. And the plant's planned exits in quarters, not days. If the foundation truly cracked, the numbers would scream. Time to open the files. The data unveiling, seeing the exodus. Pull the files, start with industrial production. The index doesn't wobble, it slides. Months below the 2015 base, then quarters. Energy-intensive industries fall hardest, with levels far below pre-2021. The troughs stop looking like troughs and start looking like a floor that keeps sinking. This isn't the usual German down cycle that snaps back when China orders rebound. It's a new baseline. Output in intermediate goods, the stuff that feeds everything else, drops hardest. That's the bloodstream thinning. Now flip to the PMI. Purchasing managers aren't melodramatic. They live on time, under budget, within tolerance. When their survey sits under 50 month after month, that's not mood, that's muscle memory failing. The production sub-index contracts. New orders don't slow, they vanish, especially export orders. Firms report stronger competition from non-domestic producers, not because their parts got worse, but because their power bills got higher. Employment falls for a long, quiet stretch, 1 month, then 6, then 18. You only cut headcount when you've exhausted every other lever. The latest readings sit deep in contraction territory. Order books tell the same story from a different angle. Backlogs, once a cushion, drain. Seasonals can't hide it. The mix thins. High value add loses share to mid-tier imports, and the "we always made that here" category starts to show foreign SKUs. Toolmakers report fewer domestic RFQs and more inquiries from US and CEE buyers. A shop that used to sell jigs to Bavaria now crates machines for export to Texas and Debrecen. Insolvencies creep up first, then step. Not the headliners, the quiet suppliers 2 tiers down. They stop paying the galvanizer, the maintenance contractor, the software license. Court notices show up in local papers. Management calls it restructuring. Credit insurers tighten. Banks raise covenants. Meanwhile, CapEx turns defensive. Replacement budgets shrink. New lines deferred. The investment that does happen shows up in strange places on the map. Subsidiaries abroad. Partnerships near cheap power. Capacity optimization outside Germany. That's how relocation appears in numbers before it appears in headlines. R&D doesn't flee overnight, but it migrates by function. Pilot lines that depended on steady power and nearby reactors shift to integrated parks where feedstock and energy are predictable. Internal memos call it global footprint alignment. The lab stays for a while, brand, talent, universities. But the scale-up rigs move, and with them the most valuable part of learning, making something new at industrial tempo. That's how ecosystems hollow without headlines. If the pilot rig leaves, the patents will be commercialized elsewhere. Trade data once the national scoreboard starts whispering. Exports still exist, volume still ships, but the composition changes. Chemicals drop share, especially energy-intensive segments. Machinery holds longer, then start to show stress in components that require long, hot processes. The car sector looks stable from a distance because final assembly is sticky. But the upstream plastics and coatings show dents you only see if you know the catalog numbers. Value added per unit edges down as more subassemblies arrive from elsewhere. SME surveys turn anecdote into signal. A growing share of firms say they're considering relocating or reducing domestic production. Considering sounds soft. It's often a lagging euphemism for we've already priced the move. Energy-intensive SMEs report margins below sustainability thresholds. Apprenticeships shrink not for lack of kids, but for lack of orders to train them on. HR teams pause intake because nobody wants to onboard into a plant that might be optimized. Watch the hedging effect fade in the numbers. Early in the shock, EBITDA doesn't collapse because contracts shield the worst. Then renewals hit and the line breaks. You see it in quarterly guidance cuts and unexpected impairment charges tied to changed market conditions. One chemical major publishes a plan to sell entire units or move them. Another quietly markets ammonia and methanol plants for relocation. That's not a rumor, that's a bill of materials for an exit. Compare electricity price spreads to margin structure. A glass line can't eat a double-digit percentage of cost just because electrons got expensive. So you see idling described as maintenance, furnaces temporarily cooled, then decommissioned. The PMI's input price index eases later, global commodity relief, but output prices don't rescue margins because demand is soft and competition is fierce. The squeeze shows up as deeper employment cuts and asset sales. The euro stops being a shock absorber. With no country-level devaluation, competitiveness has to change through costs and productivity. Productivity can't jump enough to outrun power bills and permitting delays. Costs can only fall so far before quality gets hurt. The PMI's export orders subindex tells you the verdict. The world is happy to buy German quality, just not at a power price premium. The orders go to where the power and policy are predictable. Now lay insolvency data beside CapEx geography. Insolvencies up, domestic CapEx down, foreign CapEx up in the same firms. Add a column for globalized R&D and a row for tooling relocation. Each cell fills in. Suppliers list machines for sale that only make sense if the customer base is moving. Auctions in Swabia feed purchases in Silesia. Engineers post on LinkedIn about new challenges in Tennessee. They don't move for slogans, they move for projects. All these charts, PMI under 50, industrial production grinding lower, export mix thinning, insolvencies rising, are coordinates. Plot them and you don't get noise, you get an arrow. The exodus isn't a wave, it's a current, steady and directional. And once you see the current, you notice something else. The official language doesn't match the map. That mismatch isn't an accident. It's a strategy to buy time while the crates are already on the road. The map they do show you. Lay the map flat and start pinning coordinates. The first cluster glows across the US Gulf Coast and Midwest. Why? Cheap molecules, fast permits and checks with names, IRA, CHIPS, state packages with land, rail spurs, and property tax abatements. Chemical units that once lived off German baseload are getting pitched gas at half the price and power purchase agreements that don't swing with the wind. Executives tour sites where a permit shows up in months, not years. A polymer line that stalled in Rhineland finds a pad in Texas with steam, hydrogen, and a cracker next door. The sales pitch is short. Bring the unit, we'll turn the lights on. Move your hand east. Central and Eastern Europe lights up like a belt. Poland's Silesia, Slovakia's Western Corridor, Hungary's Debrecen, Czechia's Moravia. This isn't offshoring, it's Frenchering with a short drive back to Bavaria. Wages are lower, unions are pragmatic, and municipal leaders pick up calls on Sundays. Toolmakers and Tier 2s shift cells over the border, hold onto German design teams, and keep just enough footprint to serve legacy contracts. Suddenly, a German bumper supplier is finishing in Poland, shipping back overnight, and still beating domestic costs even after tolls. Invoices don't salute flags, they balance numbers. Now turn to Asia. The dots here are bigger because the parks are cities in themselves. Coastal China offers integrated supply chains that run like clockwork, feedstock in, components out, customers across the fence. In the south, a new Verbund rises with a full materials ladder, acetyls, polyurethanes, solvents, catalysts. Vietnam adds speed, approvals in weeks, labor young and trainable, ports adding capacity. The promise is scale, containers filled, not pallets. For lines that need volume and steady power, The decision feels less like a risk and more like gravity. You can watch this exodus in mosaics. Chemicals first. Ammonia, methanol, melamine units marketed for relocation. Chloralkali cells idled for maintenance before being listed with brokers who specialize in moving entire plants. Glass follows, furnaces that can't afford to go cold move where gas is cheap enough to stay hot. Aluminum smelters and extruders thin out, with orders awarded to places where electrons don't break the bank. Auto suppliers peel capacity layer by layer. Foams to the US, injection molding to CEE, wire harnesses deeper into southeastern Europe. Final assembly lingers longer, but the guts migrate. Machine tools, Germany's crown, behave differently but still shift. The flagship 5-axis machines stay branded at home, but second lines, refurbishment, and service hubs expand eastward. The training rigs show up in new labs in Poznan and Gyre because that's where the customers are installing lines. Meanwhile, coatings and adhesives, the quiet glue of industry, bolt themselves to whichever cluster has both buyers and baseload. That often means a pier, a pipeline, and a policy packet not found west of the Oder. Follow the installations. They tell you where demand actually lives. Here's the logistics reality nobody reverses. Once you move molds and dies, you're committed. A mold is a memory, tolerances, thermal behavior, quirks only the operator and the metal share. Crate it, ship it, requalify it under a new roof with a new team, and you're not doing it again next spring because sentiment shifted. Teams move too. A senior process engineer follows the line, trains locals, and becomes the custodian of lessons learned. The know-how migrates with the metal. And yes, customers approve the new site and then build their schedules around it. Pull back and imagine the heat map. Germany dims, red clusters thinning along the Rhine, the Ruhr, Lower Saxony. Across the Atlantic, a bright arc from Louisiana to Ohio intensifies. In Europe's east, a chain of lights tightens, nodes connected by highways built for just this purpose. In Asia, coastal bands deepen, tied to railheads and export terminals pointed at the same buyers who used to sign contracts in Frankfurt. The capacity that leaves doesn't float, it docks. Now juxtapose this map with official language. Temporary optimization, portfolio review, maintenance outage. On paper, nothing moves. On the ground, customs forms list serial numbers and cranes lift heartbeats of factories into the air. HR files show retention bonuses with end dates that match voyage times. Local newspapers run small notices about auction dates for grinders and presses nobody would sell if they plan to restart. And understand the timelines. These aren't panicked flights, they're deliberate sequences. Environmental sign-offs secured abroad, customer PPAPs staged, suppliers pre-qualified, grid connections scheduled. The German sites keep just enough production to fulfill contracts while the new lines ramp. Then one day the old line pauses and the new one hits rate. The map updates. That's the reveal moment, calm words, moving cranes. That's why the language is so gentle. If you see the dots, you see the verdict. The coordinates don't argue, they add up. The map is the story they don't show you because the moment you see it, the cover narrative can't hold its shape. The language of denial. Put the heat map next to the quotes. On one side, red clusters draining out of Germany. On the other, temporary optimization, portfolio review, maintenance outage. The words are anesthetic. They're designed to numb the part that understands a mold on a flatbed isn't coming back. Start with the euphemisms. Maintenance used to mean new gaskets and a shutdown window. Now it means a furnace cooled without a reheat date. Optimization sounds like software. In practice, it's headcount lines and towns sliced to fit a higher power bill. Temporary mothballing does a lot of work. Temporary enough to stop panic, permanent enough to sell the spare parts. Then there's the forecast theater. Seasonally adjusted bases, selective year-over-year comps, the neat trick of choosing a pandemic trough as a reference to produce a green arrow. Press releases love stabilization. Stabilization at -10 isn't recovery. Officials point to 1 month's PMI uptick, avoid the sub-indexes, and never mention the order book that fell off a cliff. The narrative hangs on the calm cadence while the graphs slope the other way. Subsidy theater fills the frame. Splashy grants for single sites, photo ops at groundbreaking ceremonies, and headline numbers that blur the denominator. A €2 billion package sounds decisive until you spread it across sectors that exist because power was cheap every hour of every day. One plant gets a lifeline. A cluster still pays LNG premiums and waits 2 years for a transformer. The system-wide disadvantage doesn't go away because one ribbon got cut. Watch the press choreography. A layoff story gets a day. A closure gets a paragraph with global headwinds in the second sentence. No follow-up on whether the line restarted. No sidebar on where the dies went. Each headline is treated as an isolated weather event. Nobody strings them into a climate. Inside companies, comms craft phrases that don't spook customers. Footprint realignment reads like yoga, it's actually cranes and customs brokers. Global footprint suggests balance. It hides the axis tilting toward places with fast permits and cheaper electrons. R&D remains in Germany is technically true the week they say it. The pilot line moved 6 months ago. The bureaucracy adds its own layer. Resilience becomes a mantra as if repeating it lowers industrial tariffs. Transition is the catch-all, implying a bridge to something equally strong. But bridges need a landing. Permitting stays slow, grids stay tight, and the bills keep arriving. The language absorbs the shock and returns a neutral tone. Here's why denial buys time. Boards need to run down contracts without spooking labor or customers. Politicians need to reach the next election without admitting the model failed on their watch. Banks need loan books to degrade gradually. The gap gets filled with words that sound responsible and measured. But there's a cost. Denial delays adaptation for everyone not in the room with the exit plan. Suppliers keep investing in dead-end capacity. Apprentices train into roles that won't exist locally. Towns wait for restarts that aren't scheduled. By the time the euphemisms run out, the crates have cleared customs. So put the quotes back beside the map. The dots are blunt, the language is soft. The mismatch tells you who the delay serves and who pays for it. The supply chain dominoes. Meanwhile, the cascade starts where few people look. Chemistry. A ton of ammonia not made in Ludwigshafen doesn't just hurt fertilizer. It starves coatings for machinery, resins for dashboards, and adhesives that hold wiring looms in place. When a chloralkali cell idles, PVC doesn't ship, and neither do the gaskets and housings that keep engines sealed. A solvent shortage sounds abstract until a paint line slows because the flash-off time shifts and cars pile up waiting to cure. One reactor paused upstream becomes a delivery missed 3 tiers down. What nobody says out loud at first. Car plants can't buffer this with inventory. The EV transition was already forcing platform overhauls, software rewrites, and battery procurement gymnastics. Add energy-driven chemical volatility and the knot tightens. A supplier who used to promise polyurethanes at a fixed spec now calls about substitution grades that test differently in winter. Assembly managers start sliding jobs on the line, juggling components like air. Warranty teams whisper about risk. It's not incompetence, it's chemistry reacting to a power bill. The auto cluster itself is thinning. Wire harnesses chased labor east years ago, but now foams, injection-molded trims, and coatings inch with them because energy and permits dictate where a Curing oven can run without burning cash. Tool tryouts that once happened a short drive from the OEM move to plants over borders. Engineers drive longer, then fly, then relocate. The badge on the hood still says Germany, but the guts increasingly say otherwise. Machine tools feel it next. The crown jewels still sell on quality, but domestic order books depend on factories that upgrade lines. When chemicals slow and autos defer, the cascade hits the builders. Fewer retrofit kits, fewer spindles, fewer maintenance contracts. A 5-axis flagship might still ship to Asia or the US, but the service vans in Baden-Württemberg find fewer doors to knock on. Apprentices who expected to spend year 2 on customer installs spend it in the classroom because there are fewer installs. Construction materials are a quiet casualty. Glass furnaces hate indecision, cool them too long and you damage the crown. Keep them hot and you bleed money when gas is pricey. So you see maintenance stretch, then one furnace doesn't come back. Architects still draft facades, developers still need panes, orders shift to where furnaces stayed hot. Cement kilns with high heat demands face the same arithmetic. Projects don't stop, but local multipliers fade as the heavy stuff crosses more borders. Every 30 seconds, the human thread shows up. A process engineer in North Rhine-Westphalia gets an offer to help ramp a line in Debrecen. It's a 2-year secondment with a stipend and a promise of global opportunities. He hesitates, then goes, because that's where the molds and budgets went. A coatings chemist sees the pilot line move to the Gulf Coast Park with guaranteed power. She asks for reassignment. Training programs at home hit pause. Fewer incoming cohorts, more talk of digital skills in lieu of hands on the line. Suppliers 2 and 3 tiers down crumble quietly. A galvanizer who built his business on predictable flows finds order variability wrecking bath chemistry. He trims shifts, then sells to a firm across the border that promises steadier volume. A jig and fixture specialist loses domestic buyers and starts listing equipment. The auction goes unnoticed outside the county. The know-how disperses with the steel. Meanwhile, freight tells the truth. More outbound flatbeds with crated dies. More inbound pallets from plants that didn't exist on the vendor list 3 years ago. Logistics teams rewrite lanes to route around energy pain. It's not dramatic, it's incremental, but every rerouted truck is a vote on where capacity lives. Education pipelines lag. Dual-system apprenticeships depend on firms confident enough to commit trainers and time. When plants optimize, the intake shrinks. Universities keep graduating engineers, but the thesis projects that once happened beside a humming line now happen in simulation labs or, increasingly, at partner sites abroad. Skills don't vanish, but the feedback loop that sharpened them weakens. Now widen the lens. Germany's supply chains aren't domestic circuits, they're European webs. When chemicals thin in the Rhine, fertilizer prices ripple into Dutch greenhouses and Polish fields. When German auto clusters slow, Czech, Slovak, and Hungarian suppliers ride the whiplash. Conversely, when capacity lands in CEE, towns there heat up, western regions cool. Europe isn't losing industry evenly, it's tilting. The downstream customer notices last. A buyer ordering a run of compressors gets quoted longer lead times and a new origin. The unit works, but the service rep's nearest hub is now farther away. Response times stretch. A hospital waiting on diagnostic equipment learns the glass subassembly comes from another grid. It ships, but the buffer is thinner. This is how systems fail, not with headlines, but with clocks. A reactor slows, a curing oven pauses, a tryout moves, a van drives farther, a purchase order changes codes. Each is manageable, together they rewrite where value is made. Germany can't be sick without Europe feeling feverish, and the temperature is still rising. The global shockwave. While that was unfolding on the shop floor, the tremor moved through Europe's core. Germany isn't just another member state. It's the engine that let others draft in its wake. When that engine sputters, budget math across the bloc changes. Export surpluses that covered welfare promises thin out. Countries that counted on German demand or German credit guarantees feel the air get colder. Finance ministers start rehearsing phrases they swore they'd retired. Consolidation, efficiency, restraint. Because a slower Germany means tighter spreads and less room to bluff. Meanwhile, something else was happening across supply lines. As German capacity migrated, gaps opened like missing teeth in a gear. The United States reached in with shale energy, tax credits, and speed, selling reliability as a product. Japan reactivated industrial policy muscle and doubled down on precision upstream components. Central and Eastern Europe tightened its grip on assembly, plastics, harnesses, and castings, knitting new corridors of logistics that bypassed old hubs. China, patient and opportunistic, leaned into chemicals and EV platforms, offering both volume and the comforting hum of fully integrated parks. Eurozone politics felt the strain. A decade of hand-wringing about austerity gave way to a scramble to invent industrial policy on the fly. One camp said hold the fiscal line, the other said write bigger checks and do it yesterday. Parliaments argued over whether to shield electricity prices for industry, whether to pick national champions, whether to bend state aid rules. The rhetoric was unity, the practice was bilateral deals and quiet subsidies. Without cheap baseload, the question became crude. Who pays to keep a furnace hot and for how long? Trade blocs hardened along those debates. Frenchering stopped being a buzzword and turned into contracts. Standards started to fork. US incentives embedded domestic content thresholds. Europe responded with its own green strings. Asia wrote rules that favored its clusters' scale. A Tier 2 supplier that once sold one spec into 3 continents now juggled compliance dialects and origin rules that acted like tariffs without the name. Complexity wasn't a side effect, it was the mechanism of pressure. Emerging markets watched and moved. Mexico picked up mid-tier manufacturing linked to the US grid and market. India pitched electronics and chemicals with generous land and fast permits. Vietnam and Thailand deepened their roles in auto subassemblies and consumer appliances. None of these places replaced German engineering culture, but they didn't need to. They needed the specific pieces being pried loose by power prices and permitting delays. Capacity is practical, not sentimental. From their perspective, EU institutions tried to orchestrate a response. Joint purchasing of energy, faster renewables build-out, cross-border grids, hydrogen corridors. Some progress landed, A lot hit the wall of permitting and local opposition. The timeline mismatch was brutal. You can move a plant in 18 months. You don't build a new high-voltage corridor in the same window. So the short run set the terms for the long run. Firms made permanent choices to survive temporary chaos. This was the moment everything changed for corporate playbooks. Risk matrices that once scored Germany as low cost, low volatility moved it 2 boxes to the right. Boards started to value redundancy over optimization. Dual sourcing and dual site strategies stopped being belt and suspenders and became the price of entry. Capital followed confidence, and confidence followed the kilowatt hour. If a region could guarantee power, permits, and policy continuity, it won. If it hedged and litigated, it watched. In the aftermath, the politics shifted underfoot. Regions inside Germany that lost anchors drifted toward parties promising disruption, sometimes green, sometimes populist, always impatient. Neighboring countries that gained plants campaigned on "we deliver." Brussels tried to square the circle: climate goals, social model, competitiveness, while the clock kept ticking on industrial clocks, not legislative ones. Europe didn't collapse. It tilted toward the places that could move faster, even if that meant stretching the rules. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The shockwave didn't stop at Europe's edge. U.S. unions negotiated from strength because projects needed hands now. Asian ports booked capacity years out. Commodity flows rewired. LNG contracts lengthened. Coal retirements got resequenced. Carbon math got messier as companies balanced green promises against the reality that cheap, reliable power elsewhere beat expensive intermittent power at home. No one said it out loud on stage. Procurement signed the deals anyway. Can Germany reverse this? It would need a power price regime that competes in industrial time, permits that land in quarters, not years, and a political consensus that holds past one election. The window isn't closed, but it's narrow. Tooling is already mounted abroad. Operators are training new crews. Boards have scars. A policy package might slow the bleeding. It won't rewind crates that cleared customs. The shockwave has moved on. The question isn't whether it happened. It's who's reshaping their maps before the next tremor hits. Watch for energy contracts, not speeches. The point of no return. This is where choices stop being reversible. Start with tooling, the silent governors of destiny. A mold isn't a commodity, it's a memory carved into steel. It knows how a polymer cools, where a part warps, which operator leans on which clamp. When a company creates that memory and ships it to Ohio or Debrecen, it's not just moving metal. It's requalifying entire processes with new teams, new utilities, new suppliers. Customer approvals follow the mold. Quality data accumulates there. Every hour it runs abroad adds inertia. Could you move it back? Technically, yes. Economically, not after the new plant hits rate and the old one goes dark. Supplier ecosystems obey the same physics. A factory is a node, its value is the network. Fasteners, coatings, metrology, heat treatment, each sits within a drive time radius that keeps lead times tight and problem solving in person. Once the anchor shifts, satellites chase it. A heat treater opens across the border. A coating shop signs a lease near the new park. Local clusters thin until the last reliable service van stops coming. Path dependence sets like resin. You go where your neighbors are because solving problems alone is slow and expensive. Energy locks the door. The pipeline era priced confidence into every invoice. The LNG era adds a premium and volatility. Even if spot prices drift down, firms have learned the variance matters as much as the mean. Board minutes capture it in careful wording. Preference for baseload certainty. In practice, that means siting where electrons are abundant, cheap, and predictable. Germany can add subsidies, cap levies, offer rebates. But if the underlying regime is higher and slower to change than competitors, the risk discount never closes. The premium for being here doesn't get paid. Regulation turns time into a weapon. Permitting that once signaled diligence now signals delay. Environmental reviews, grid interconnection queues, litigation windows, each defensible in isolation, lethal in sequence. A compressor station needs 3 signatures. An expansion triggers a new round. Neighbors have standing. The calendar slips a year. Meanwhile, in a rival jurisdiction, the same project runs through one-stop shops and 180-day clocks with guaranteed appeals timelines. When a company models NPV, it's not just comparing wage rates. It's comparing calendar risk. The longer the ramp, the nastier the discount rate. Slide beyond 2 budget cycles and the CFO writes, not viable in region. Capital cements the move. Depreciation schedules abroad lock assets for a decade. Debt covenants tie utilization to specific sites. Tax holidays embed clawbacks if production leaves early. Add supplier contracts with volume commitments and the flexibility story is over. Even the language in investor decks hardens. Flagship site, platform location, core hub. You don't unwind a platform without confessing a strategic error. Boards carry scars from the energy shock. They won't rebet on the same square that burned them. Playbooks shift. Diversify basins, split capacity, never depend on one grid again. Germany moves from default to option, and options only get exercised when the price is right and the clock is short. Corporate memory is a moat and a wall. Executives who spent 18 months negotiating emergency power deals, juggling maintenance on furnaces they couldn't cool, and rewriting vendor lists at midnight won't forget. The presumption of reliability is gone. In its place, checklists, red teams, second sources. A new German incentive might be generous, but it's treated as a pilot, not a pivot. One outage, one court injunction, one tariff rumor sends the risk committee back to page 1. Workers and know-how follow the gradients. The senior die setter takes the relocation package to Hungary because the press he knows is there. The coatings chemist moves to the Gulf Coast because the pilot line lives inside a park with steam and hydrogen on tap. Apprentices switch tracks to software or logistics because the local plant paused intake. Once careers realign, communities realign with them. Schools tilt curricula. Tech colleges buy different machines. The social fabric restitches around a different economy, thinner and less industrial. Customers quietly redraw their own maps. OEMs don't like risk. If a supplier's German site looks wobbly, they dual source in Poland, Tennessee, or Guangdong. Volume shifts to the reliable node, and with it the learning that makes parts better over time. The German line becomes the secondary, then the backup, then a footnote. By the time a policy fix lands, the buyer's PPAP is stamped somewhere else, and switching back would mean respending money they just justified to their board. Could a bold package reverse any of this? It would need 3 things at industrial speed. Power prices competitive with shale and coastal coal, permitting measured in quarters with legal certainty, and a bipartisan guarantee that outlives a cabinet. Even then, the path back is uphill. You're asking firms to abandon newly depreciating assets, break covenants, and pay to move memory-laden steel again. Most won't. A few might add niches, high-end, low-energy, IP-heavy cells that justify the premium. But the mass, the humming baseline that fed towns and tax bases, has already picked a side. That leaves one more blunt truth. The point of no return isn't a date on a press release. It's the day a crate left a loading dock, a permit was stamped abroad, a depreciation table started ticking, a supplier opened next to a new fence line. Those choices compound. They harden. And by the time you feel the absence on a Monday morning in an empty parking lot, the system made up its mind months ago. The new German economy, minus the engine. Walk through a town that used to hum at shift change, and you hear keyboards instead of presses. What remains looks active. Consultancies renting top floors, logistics firms filling warehouses, software boutiques with open-plan optimism. There's motion, invoices, and tax IDs. But the core is missing. Services orbit an engine that isn't there and orbits without gravity drift. Consulting grows because decline needs advice, cost takeouts, site exits, procurement rewrites. It pays well, but it doesn't spin multipliers like a forge. A plant once supported tool shops, bakers, bus routes, and club dues. A slide deck supports hotels and rideshares on workshop days. Software firms land contracts, but many sell to customers no longer local. Code travels, payrolls shrink when projects move abroad. Logistics expands because boxes still move, though more of them cross the border now. Wages are thinner than a skilled trades, churn higher, ladders shorter. There are islands of resilience. Pharma keeps its labs tight, patents thick, and quality systems trusted. Optics specialists still polish glass to tolerances that win contracts. High-end machinery makers protect niches where failure costs are unacceptable. They hire, train, and export. But add the numbers, these islands don't feed entire regions. A precision optics campus can't absorb 1,000 displaced metalworkers. A boutique machining line can't balance a county's budget. That's aftermath, not a new engine. Defense spending ticks up, procurement plans, maintenance backlogs, new brigades. Yards see orders, small systems integrators hire. But defense supply chains are narrow and gated. They demand certifications and volumes that don't ripple like consumer markets. A tracked vehicle contract anchors a handful of towns, not a state. And cycles bite. Appropriations stretch, program timelines slip, and the political wind shifts with a headline. It cushions, it doesn't replace. Green bets are real, but they hit the same wall the old engine hit. power price and permitting time. Electrolyzer startups demo elegant stacks. Customers ask for cost per kilogram tied to electrons that remain expensive. Heat pump makers fight for scale while installers fight for permits. Grid upgrades lag. A pilot wins an award, the gigafactory math doesn't close. When growth does happen, it leans on imported components because upstream chemistry moved where baseload is cheaper. The margin leaks out with every crate. Meanwhile, the spreadsheet darkens at the top of the page. An aging population raises pension and healthcare obligations. Municipalities collect less from corporate profits and payrolls, more from property and small business. Schools face the awkward pivot, fewer apprenticeships in trades that paid well, more digital skills modules that sound modern but don't guarantee wages. Universities keep prestige. Their spin-offs often list an overseas manufacturing address. Viral truth: services can grow fast on slides, towns grow on shifts. Engineers follow projects. A controls specialist finds more career inside a new park abroad than inside a shrinking cluster at home. A materials scientist stays for family, ends up teaching, and tells students stories about production cycles they'll never run locally. The apprenticeship master retires with fewer apprentices than the cohort he trained under. The chain thins link by link. Household budgets feel it quietly. The skilled industrial wage that once supported a family, a mortgage, and a car becomes a service wage that supports rent and a used hatchback. Consumption shifts down a gear. Fewer restaurant nights, deferred dental work, postponed home upgrades. Retail adjusts, main streets turn over faster. Pride adjusts too. The identity tied to making tangible things gives way to vague nouns, solutions, platforms, ecosystems. Useful but less rooted. Policy tries to script a new model, clusters of AI, climate tech, and digital public services. Some will stick, but no silver lining offsets the physics of multipliers. A machining cell saturates a town with paychecks, a cloud contract doesn't. A refinery supplies a lattice of vendors, an app scales with servers. You can build a modern economy on ideas. Germany did for decades by wrapping ideas around metal and molecules. When the metal and molecules leave, the leftover services don't grow into a trunk. They stay branches. This isn't a reset, it's an aftermath. The map already shifted. What's left can be dignified, honest, and even innovative. It just won't carry the weight the engine carried, and that weight still has to go somewhere. The cautionary tale: dependency as design flaw. What you just saw wasn't a uniquely German failure, it was a design pattern laid bare. Over-optimization works until the world changes faster than your process can. Germany mastered just-in-time geopolitics, import the energy, lock the contracts, perfect the hardware, and squeeze waste down to microns. It looked elegant because the buffer lived off-stage. When the buffer vanished, the elegance cracked. That's the caution. Resilience isn't an add-on, it's an input. If you outsource it, you don't have it when you need it. Start with the mirror image every industry now faces. Single-source energy risk is the same animal as single-supplier chip risk. It doesn't matter whether the invisible dependency is a Siberian pipeline or a 12-inch fab in Taiwan. If one rupture halts a nation's wage engine, you've built a fragility machine. And here's the kicker: once capacity migrates to stability, it tends to calcify there. Customers don't approve plants twice for fun. Processes don't get requalified because someone gave a nice speech. The move creates its own gravity. Policy mirages hide that truth in the short run. Cheap inputs, subsidized energy, underpriced carbon, permissive grids can mask an uncompetitive framework for years. Then the subsidy ends or the supply is cut and the weakness arrives all at once. You can announce a 10-year hydrogen roadmap. The procurement team signs a 12-month power contract today. You can cap industrial rates for one site. The cluster still pays the system cost. Theater comforts voters, balance sheets watch electrons. That's the gap where factories vanish. Culture plays a role and not the flattering kind. Excellence in iteration is a gift until the baseline shifts. Institutions built to shave seconds off a proven cycle struggle to admit the cycle died. Committees ask for more data while the freight forwarder loads the die. It's not pride, it's wiring. The meeting agenda rewards optimization. Reinvention looks like heresy until it's too late to matter. There's a universal warning in the timeline mismatch. Economies talk in decades, firms move in quarters. Germany didn't lose factories because it lacked plans. It lost them because the gap between planning and permitting was longer than the gap between purchase orders and power bills. That window exists everywhere. If your grid takes years to connect, if your appeals process lets one injunction idle a plant for a season, your calendar itself is a cost. Investment flees clocks it can't trust. Screenshot this line, it's the whole playbook. Now fold in finance. Capital follows certainty, and certainty follows priceable risk. A place with slightly higher wages can still win if its risks are knowable. A place with volatile energy or volatile politics becomes a discount that gets bigger with every board review. Hedge funds talk spreads, plant managers talk uptime. They're arguing the same thing. If your system forces operators to prey to the spot market, you're already negotiating from weakness. The harsh part, reversibility is overrated. People imagine capacity as a caravan that can be turned around. It is. It's a lattice, contracts, covenants, spares, tacit knowledge that regrows where it's planted. Germany's exodus proved how quickly ecosystems reroute when offered power, permits, and policy stability. The lesson is don't move. It's don't force a move you can't undo. So what does resilience actually look like? Redundancy that costs money before it saves your life. Dual energy pathways even when one seems enough. Second, suppliers qualified before the crisis. Permitting that is strict and fast because delay is a hidden tax on competitiveness. Transparent price signals that don't rely on wishful subsidies. And a culture that rewards the person who says the world changed as much as the one who says we trimmed 2 seconds. Emphasize consequence, not prescription. If you design your prosperity around a single cheap input, you're borrowing luck. If you calibrate policy to yesterday's margin, you're betting the house on a baseline that won't hold. Germany's story isn't a morality play about hubris, it's a field report from the front edge of a global realignment. Any advanced economy can reproduce this failure if it outsources resilience and treats time as free. The bill always arrives. The only question is who's prepared to pay it before the crate leaves the dock. What to watch in your own backyard? This isn't a German story. It's a checklist for wherever you live. Start with energy exposure. Ask 3 simple questions. What's the actual source mix behind your kilowatt hour? How does your industrial tariff compare to the US Gulf Coast, CEE, and coastal Asia? And is your grid reliable enough to anchor multi-shift production without backup generators? If the spread is wide and outages are rising, your factories are already having quiet conversations you won't hear until the crates move. Now look at concentration. Pull one product and trace the inputs. How many single-supplier choke points sit inside it? 1 resin, 1 precision casting, 1 port, 1 rail spur. If a single node can stop the line, you're living the same fragility Germany discovered when gas went from pipeline to LNG cargo. Red flags, vendors who won't share second-source plans, and purchase orders that quietly lengthen lead times without explanation. Permitting speed is your next tell. Find a recent industrial project and measure the clock. Application to decision, appeals, grid interconnection. Not the brochure timeline, the lived one. If the answer is years, that delay is a tax your competitors elsewhere aren't paying. Strict and fast beats strict and slow every time. Ask local officials one question: what's the median time to a transformer? If they can't answer, you already know. Follow the capital. Track CapEx announcements by geography. Are expansions landing in neighboring states or countries with lower energy and faster permits? Watch for footprint optimization language and platform site declarations. It means commitments are being cemented where the power is steady. Tooling moves are the loudest quiet signal. Broker listings for entire lines, auctions for specialized machines, and heavy lift bookings at ports you've never had to think about. Scan your workforce drift. Where are apprenticeships growing and where are they paused? Which community colleges are buying new CNCs and which are repurposing labs to digital skills? LinkedIn tells its own story. Process engineers announcing relocations to specific parks, commissioning techs celebrating new lines in clusters that didn't exist 5 years ago. People follow projects. When they move, ecosystems follow them. Don't ignore R&D geography. Pilot lines need stable power and a short walk to production. When labs globalize, check where the scale-up rigs go. If your region keeps the whiteboards but loses the rigs, you're being turned into a showroom. It looks prestigious until you notice the patents are commercialized on another grid. Talk to suppliers 2 tiers down. They feel shocks first. Ask the galvanizer about variability. Ask the adhesive rep about substitution grades. Ask the freight dispatcher which lanes are growing. If the answers are cautious or strangely upbeat without numbers, that's code for turbulence. Finally, watch the language. Temporary optimization, maintenance, portfolio review. We just translated those. Set a folder and file every euphemism next to actual asset movements. You'll see the map before the press release admits it. The story started with a shutdown. It ends with a choice. If your region can guarantee cheap, reliable power, fast, lawful permits, and predictable rules, you'll catch the capacity that's moving. If it can't, you'll be watching the flatbeds drive past. The New World Order. Zoom out and the German exodus reads like an opening chapter, not a footnote. Capacity is resorting itself into regions that can promise three things at once: cheap electrons, short calendars, and steady rules. Where those line up, the cranes never stop. Where they don't, the temporary turns into for sale. Winners share a profile. Energy-rich basins lock in baseload, Texas and Louisiana with shale and steam, parts of the Midwest with firmed power deals, coastal Asia with coal-to-gas backstops inside sprawling industrial parks. Permits land in quarters, appeals have clocks. Subsidies don't pretend to be strategy, they grease speed. A company arrives with a PFD and a timeline, and the local office answers with land, interconnects, and a straight path to a commissioning date. Reliability is the product. Executives buy it. Frenchering regions tighten next. Central and Eastern Europe stitch themselves into a continuous belt of assembly, plastics, castings, and electronics. They're close enough to German design offices to keep standards high, but far enough from German cost structures to win bids. Rail spines link parks to ports. Universities cut programs to match what factories actually order. Municipalities don't talk about competitiveness. They act on it in procurement, zoning, and phone calls returned on weekends. The losers have a different pattern. High-cost, slow-moving systems lean on legacy advantages that don't price into invoices anymore. They write vision papers while investors ask about timelines. Power is expensive, intermittent, or both. Courts make policy by delay. A single transformer takes a year. The talent is there, the brands are strong, but the rhythm is wrong. Companies that can't wait don't. Trade and standards are hardening along these lines. Domestic content rules build moats, rival moats spring up. An auto supplier that once ran one global spec now maintains 3 variants for 3 blocks with certification calendars to match. Complexity becomes a tariff by another name. Firms that control the full ladder from cracker to component use that control to lock demand inside their grids. The ones that don't move to where someone else does. Confidence now follows power, prices, and policy like a shadow. Regions that get those two right attract not just factories, but the invisible scaffolding. Banks willing to write loans against assets that will actually run, insurers that don't load policies with outage riders, service companies that hire because their vans will have doors to knock on for a decade. Capacity follows confidence. Confidence follows the kilowatt hour and the calendar. There's a personal rule that emerges from this map. Resilience beats prestige. A modest park that guarantees uptime is worth more than a prestigious zip code with a fragile grid. Redundancy beats perfection. 2 good enough sites in different basins will outrun 1 perfect site in the wrong place. Managers will speak this in spreadsheets. Families will live it in moves, mortgages, and schools. Germany's chapter isn't over. It's instructive. It shows how fast ecosystems can uproot when incentives and physics align elsewhere. It also shows how language can hide the move long enough for it to become irreversible. That combination, speed outside, softness inside, will repeat wherever leaders confuse plans with power. You weren't supposed to see all the dots at once. The quotes were designed to keep you inside one headline at a time. But the heat map is visible now, bright arcs where electrons are cheap, dimming corridors where permits are slow. The realignment isn't coming, it's here. The only question left is whether your region reads this as a warning or a forecast to trade against. Factories leaving aren't noise. They're a verdict on a model that ran out of baseload, time, and trust. If you want the next chapter, who becomes Europe's backbone and how those corridors lock in, watch our follow-up. Subscribe and turn on alerts so you don't miss the field reports that reveal where capacity, confidence, and careers are moving next. Share this with the one person who still thinks maintenance means restart.